Okay, now it's going.
There we are. There we go.
It's going to open on Monday and Saturdays.
So people can use computers there.
The hub. Can they use computers at hub? Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, it's going to be just. Okay. Do you know what? I'm just going to turn. Get rid of that.
So we are now live on YouTube, just to advise everybody.
Please do not swear.
Yeah, please do not swear. It's
Was that somebody who wanted help, was it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Okay, so well, I'll do an official intro then in case somebody is online and watching it. Well, they won't be because it's currently on this. Anyway, welcome to Creative Network with James Holcombe.
Hello.
Hello, thank you for joining us. So James, why don't you just give us the briefest of well, not the briefest. No, it doesn't have to be brief. Give us a
No, we met before.
about yourself for the benefit of the tape, as they like to say. Can you tell us about your practice as an artist and your background?
Okay, so I find like talking about trying to sort of separate out the practice with the background with what I do is very hard, because in a sense they are kind of all interlocking and overlapping Venn diagrams. So for me, sort of teaching education is indivisible with practice, with the form of the lab, with the sorts of things that I do and the services that I offer. So what that ends up being, therefore, is quite a sort of pinball wizard free-form conversation that sort of pings one thing off another. It doesn't really tie me down to any one thing. And in terms of practice, it's quite loose, it's quite open. I suppose one could say that I'm quite inspired and drawn to the idea of photochemical filmmaking, and particularly projection as a kind of event. By which I mean, what kind of got me into all of this was improvised music in relation to sort of expanded cinema and performance, and the ability, particularly silent plastic photochemical film, seemed to have to be able to work with any music form or in any sort of situation or in any art form, and seem to kind of blend itself very well with that. So what got me started in all of this was a very inspiring place called the Clinker Club, which was in Hackney in Dalston, had been running for 30 years as a performance venue, showcasing sort of improvised music, free jazz, experimental jazz, poetry, anything and everything in between, but a very, very eclectic mix, noise music, things like that. But there was always a space for filmmakers working with Super 8 and 16mm to show their work. And that's kind of where I started making things to show there. And of course, thinking that I'd sort of invented expanded film, like having two projectors running at the same time or images overlapping with each other. So yes, I'd say my work, it kind of goes between single screen work. I make digital, works on film for digital projection, single screen, but I'm much happier projecting my work on film with projectors in a kind of expanded context, and normally with other performers and musicians and things like that. So a kind of mix of, in terms of that's the kind of form the work takes. In terms of the content, I've always thought structural material film was actually really quite hilarious, intentionally or unintentionally. So for me, there's a humor in that. And I think I'm quite interested into the absurd. I think the absurdity is really important when it comes to working with film, and a sense of the absurd, because of the sheer expense, inconvenience and time it takes to work with. You have to have a sense of the absurd, really. But I find that humor and absurdity is always a very good key from which you can unlock all sorts of other things, like, politics, the times we're living in. Again, film seems to be a medium that you're able to kind of reach back into time and into the future with, in a way perhaps that digital kind of isn't quite. Film has a sort of inherent nostalgia anyway. So you're sort of always working with that. But you can kind of embrace that instead of fighting against it. So yeah, I guess I'm not really very good about talking about my work. But I would say that yeah, I draw upon the absurdity of film in its sort of very being, its very material being, like the absurdity of how it came into being, the absurdity of using these antiquated machines and equipment and sort of fighting to keep them running. But instead of sort of trying to, fight a losing war, I embrace the failure, I encompass the failure, and I incorporate the failure. And hopefully I make works that are funny, make you think a little bit, and I think that's all I have to say. I'm going to be kicking myself afterwards, going, "What a load of old rubbish that was!" But yeah.
Well, I invite
With a tape
to chip in too, but
Yeah.
I've never thought about it like that. Never thought about it So what was the first example of that absurdity that you saw?
So I didn't study fine art formally, otherwise I would have been trained in how to speak about my work, because I think that's part of the art school practice, isn't it? Is you get to talk the talk whilst walking the walk. And I've never done that. So my education was at the University of the Car Boot Fair. The very first projector I ever bought was a standard 8 projector. The very first film stock I ever bought from a car boot fair was a roll of Super 8 film. I bought props with me. That's a cartridge of Super 8 film. I will be relying on these crutches throughout this evening, here and there. They will be supporting me. That's a roll of Super 8. So I shot this roll of Super 8. I sent it off to Switzerland for processing. The film was grossly out of date. It came back 2 weeks later in a little orange envelope. And I then proceeded to attempt to project the Super 8 film through the standard 8 projector. And so what happened was that something projected, but as each frame projected, it literally melted itself in real time in front of me in sequence. So I was like, well, this is extraordinary, isn't it? You have something which appears to be, two-dimensional, it has a, less than a millimeter thickness. But once it's projected and something happens to it, its state of being can change at a moment. It can be scratched, it can pick up dust and dirt. And the most violent example of all is it can literally melt and burn in the projector whilst you're projecting it. And I suppose, whereas for most people, those are kind of like, right, forget that, I'm going to work digitally. I'm going to work, either with video or digital video, which didn't exist at the time. I'm talking years ago. I just thought that was hilarious. I thought the idea that something could just melt like that, something precious that you spent ages making, melting, it still makes me laugh. I'm still entranced by it. But what was really key for me was, although it appeared to be destroyed, and when you take it out of the projector and you hold it up and there's burn holes all the way down like this, every frame is burnt. But the kind of the superstructure, the bit either side, the sprockets and the edges remained whole. So you could continue to project it. So I was like, well, that's one tough medium, isn't it? That you can literally, it can catch fire, but it can still exist and still be projected. And if I didn't say it before, it was remarkable that something went from being 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional and literally melting and dripping in real time. So that was kind of the epiphany, the very first time. And I've never really got over it. I'm still in love with that moment where something just became, changed form and became something else. Yeah. And failed, it failed.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And it kind of almost speaks to the human condition, that sort of frailty and that, but also that sort of strength and the absurdity. It totally relates, doesn't it, to us as a kind of a, what do you call it, a species.
Yes, that's right. And part of the idea of so to kind of go back to your first question, so one can work with film as the auteur on your own. You can shoot it, you can send it away for processing and scanning. This is the workflow now, really. You shoot your roll of Super 8, you send it off, it's processed for you in a machine, it's scanned and digitized, and then you work solely with your images digitally. The film never sees a projector, it just stays in a can on the shelf. And actually, horrifyingly, in my opinion, there are some people who don't even get their negatives back. They just stay in the can with a lab, and the lab quietly dispose of them or recycle them and get the silver back at some point. So that's kind of anathema to me. You know, I want, what I also love about this is that you kind of have agency in every stage of the process of making it, even actually to the point where, you know, we used to do workshops where you could make your own film emulsion. You know, I've done it where you just mix gelatin, silver nitrate, potassium bromide, and under red light you paint it onto a strip, and that gives you a very, very slow film emulsion. It's about 2 ASA, so you can only use it in the brightest of light, but actually you could put that through your camera, process it, and then print it or project it or do something else with it. It's highly experimental, but I kind of, this is not, I don't want anyone to go away from this thinking that I'm in any way anti-digital, because I'm not. I just don't have the same relationship to it. For me, it's a wonderful, necessary tool. It's not an evil tool, it's a necessary tool, but I don't have the same relationship to it, because actually when digital fails, it's not fun. Because there's no way back, is there, when it fails? It's you know, I don't want to swear, this is on the tape, isn't it? But yeah, that's it. There's no way back, you know, unless you spend a lot of money and someone can recover what you've lost. Whereas ironically with film, it remains as a physical object that can be stored in an archive. It can be digitized again and again, whereas with digital, it's reliant, it can't migrate itself. It has to be migrated, it has to be upgraded, more and more storage has to be sought, more and more rivers have to be diverted to cool down the servers that store the ones and the zeros. And that's not, again, I'm not making an argument for film over digital. I'm just pointing out that there is an inconvenient truth with being able to shoot for hours and hours on end without, you know, seemingly without price. There is a price at the end of it. There's a price at the end of that as well. It's about £50, you know, for 3 minutes, but that's a tangible cost, whereas digital to me is intangible.
Yeah, I suppose the thing about film that we think about is the chemicals involved in the making of it and the processing of it. But I can kind of imagine that as we move forward and develop new materials, you know, that a sort of more environmentally friendly alternative might come along. But I also wanted to ask you, because we recently interviewed photographers for a project commission with the Mendipe OMB, and the photographer, who is also a geologist, trained originally as a geologist, Elizabeth Wooger, who's been appointed. Her work is fantastic. And looking at some of the examples of where she'd use kind of alternative techniques. So there's some images where she's allowed like the water that filters through rocks to kind of wash over the images. And so I wanted to ask about whether you'd kind of experimented with those, you know, all those alternative kind of methods, of which, you know, the cathinol-based process is but one, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, yes, cathinol is, you know, I guess it's the kind of go-to shtick now, isn't it? He said probably going to be using cathinol if we do the Bolex workshop there in June. But anyway, yeah, it's the go-to formula, isn't it? Because it supposedly doesn't leave any environmental footprint. Although, to be honest, I feel like most black and white developers actually aren't the harmful thing. The harmful thing in processing is the fix. It's the sodium thiosulfate, which dissolves the silver crystals in the emulsion and washes silver away and retains it in the liquid. That's the thing. If it goes down the drain, you're basically putting heavy metal back into you know, the water table. Although in such minute quantities with film that I would argue, unless you were doing industrial level kind of machine processing, you know, these things are cumulative, aren't they? So I guess we shouldn't be putting fix down the sink. But to answer your question directly, there are people I'm following on Instagram. There's a guy called Graal Tregan, Curioso Lab, who's doing some really, really interesting work with using, I mean, you know, it helps that they are a chemist, but doing work with rust, making developers out of rust, cardboard boxes, and also, you know, not taking it at face value that this cathinol formula is actually the most environmentally friendly thing out there. They do a workshop on how one can make the cathinol safe post-processing to actually compost with it safely. So, I think, yeah, a note of caution should be sounded when it comes to the idea of any, eco formula actually being 100% benign. You certainly wouldn't drink the caffeinol once you processed with it. But it's a nice idea to think it can go down the sink with impunity, but I wonder whether actually that is really the truth, whether that is the case. But I've used rosemary. My favorite developer is rosemary of the eco palette. Rosemary is very beautiful. You take 2 sprigs of rosemary, boil it for 40 minutes, leave it to stand until it cools down to about 20 degrees. And then you add your vitamin C and your washing soda. And that gives you a developer. See, the reason I can remember the formula is like rosemary is good for the memory, right? So it's beautiful. It fills your house with a really beautiful perfume scent. And it's very pleasant to use. And I love the grain it gives in black and white. It gives,
wow.
I like grain in film. So it's a very grainy developer.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm a fan.
Oh, mental note, any excuse to go and buy more kind of plants.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. But I suspect probably anything would work as long as you had vitamin C and sodium carbonate in the right quantity. I'm still waiting for someone to do blood developing. I don't think that's happened yet, but it's only a matter of time, for someone does a Tony Hancock and makes a pint of blood developer.
Oh,
That's a cultural reference most people may not get, isn't it? Oh my God.
Yeah. No, I bought a book because another photographer kind of went, oh, I've got this book called Spirit of Salt.
Yes, by Martin Ware.
Yeah, I've
Yes.
literally just bought it. It's arrived this week, and with that thing of, I wonder what other techniques might be kind of plundered for developing film. So
yes, that's it's a good primer. There's a really fantastic one called what's it called? The Encyclopedia of Photographic Techniques. It's about £40 and it's about that thick, but it's got every technique that's ever existed since the idea that an image could be made chemically. So it starts off with I think are they called anthrotypes? Is anyone in the room know anthrotypes? So where you boil plants and you get the chlorophyll from the plants, and then you lay an object down in sunlight and it leaves the image of itself behind.
Oh yeah, no, we did that, didn't we?
I think they're called anthrotypes.
Yeah,
oh no, that's phytograms, but this is like, this is different. This is actually using the chlorophyll from plants as the chemical on paper. They did a workshop in it a few years ago at the Fox Talbot, the Laycock Abbey, the Fox Talbot Museum at Laycock in Wiltshire, which is the home of photography in Britain. They did a workshop there in it. So some of the earliest, before even cyanotypes, images were being made by soaking paper in chlorophyll and then placing objects. So there's one of a child's nightdress, which is still, you can still view it under very dim light. It hasn't faded. And it's from like the 18th, it's about 20 years before cyanotype, I think. So if this is going out live, there will be people writing furious comments underneath going, this man doesn't know what he's talking about. Don't at me. I don't remember, but I think they're called anthrotypes. Yeah.
Oh no, well, I'll be Googling that later, definitely. Yeah, because it is, in all seriousness, the whole thing about the planet and climate change. So, anything that gives us the opportunity to continue to make work while having a minimal footprint on the planet has got to be embraced.
Yes, and the great thing, I'm going to opportunity to bring another prop out. There's the Bolex camera. So, again, I'm not making the argument that we should all be, put away the mobile phones and start using Bolexes instead. But the fact is, that is a clockwork motor. It gives you about 25 seconds of shooting silently. And this camera can be repaired, apart from when the spring breaks and then we have to bury it in a shoebox or, put it, maybe find a niche at Somerset Film, an alcove in which we can venerate it. But there you go. I can see the UMIG there. I can see it behind the potted palm. Yeah, there it is, winking at us. But yeah, that is the great beauty of this equipment is that some of it is clockwork. All of it can be repaired if you can find the people with the skills or find engineers willing to sort of make new parts for them, like the Steenbeck behind. You know, my Steenbeck is currently being repaired, you know, and an engineer is whittling new pieces of metal for it. Whereas, you know, again, current contemporary technology, although there are moves to legislation is being put in place, isn't it? Like the right to repair bill going through Parliament to enable things to be fixed and repaired. But, you know, we are sort of conditioned to think that these things are just disposable and easily disposed of. And again, that's not necessarily the case, is it?
No. It was something that when we were looking at we were talking about we showed a film called Fashion Reimagined at the weekend, and actually Yolanda in the audience said that, you know, this idea of we throw some, you know, a piece of clothing, we buy it really cheap, we wear it, and then we throw it away, and it's this idea of it disappears, but it doesn't.
No.
You know, so yeah.
No, that's right. And I don't think we are taught enough of the carbon footprint of, you know, a tweet or an Instagram post. And I do think in our lifetime we will see clockwork mobile phones, where if you want to post something on social media, you actually have to wind it up before you can do it. In fact, I think that's such a great idea. I really should. I just give the whole thing up and just go into that business. Clockwork social media. So you have to really think, if you want to get into a flame war with somebody, how many cranks of the phone it takes to tell someone to go, you know, F themselves.
I love it. I can definitely see why this as a medium really appeals to artists. You know, the process and the approach. As well as for me, I think it's possibly more of that. You know, the rose tinted spectacles. You know, a little bit kind of looking back. That's why I like it.
I think, as I said when we met, you know, a month or so ago, when I was working, you know, in the lab in London and running the space in London, I was just amazed at who would come through the doors seeking to interact with this medium, which, you know, like you know, from sonic arts, sculpture, painting, photography, performance, dance. It just seemed to find its way. Like a thread you could weave through all these different practices in a way that, you know, no other medium really seems to be able to do, which I thought was kind of fascinating.
And so, you know, and the thing is, you've been earning a living doing this.
Well, you know, my wife's just come home. I mean, you know, she's a teacher, so yeah, let's. She's not logged on right now, but that's debatable. That's debatable though.
But you've worked in different labs, and you also, do you want to tell us a little bit about kind of how the different sort of initiatives that you've been involved in over the years?
Yeah, so I so kind of circles back to your first question. So I started, you know, fiddling around with this equipment back in the late 90s, and shooting these films and burning them, and, you know, gleefully enjoying the smoldering images. And then I started to run workshops in pubs with the Clinker Club. The founder, being a Super 8 filmmaker, he had no idea that in the Soviet Union, I'm bringing out all the props fairly early, it seems. It feels like I'm bringing them out early. That's a Soviet processing tank. So again, the idea with this was always to keep it. See, I'm going to interrupt myself now. The idea was to always keep it as affordable as possible. So that's a spiral with which you can process 8mm or 16mm film, right? So it makes things much quicker and much cheaper to use. So he and I started to do Super 8 workshops with musicians in the basements of pubs and in cellars, which we'd turn into dark rooms. And then, you know, the landlady had no idea what we were doing, but we would be processing films in the sink. And then in the evening, there'd be a mass improvisation with the films being projected at different speeds. That brought me to the attention of two artists, Karen Mirza, who is now Noor Afshan Mirza, and Brad Butler, who were attempting to set up a new space that was going to house the filmmaking equipment, which had been at what was the London Filmmakers Cooperative, which you may have heard of in the room. So there had always been a space since the mid-60s for artists to work with photochemical film you know, and clearly in the mid-60s, that was the only way really one could make images, because, you know, even the Sony Portapaks were going to come along a lot, you know, a few years later than that. And that space, the London Filmmakers Co-op, had survived in various moves and forms and incarnations and under the control of various groups from 1966, I think, until 2000 or 2001, when it became the Lux Centre, and that was in East London, and then that closed because it was a classic story of the landlords wanting more rent. So between 2001 and 2004, there wasn't anywhere in the UK really that people, like a dedicated space for people to work with photochemical production resources, until my aforementioned colleagues were able to secure a small grant from the Arts Council to set up a sort of one up, one down space in Kilburn in a former garage, you know, with a roll up door. And that's when I first met them and first interacted with them, and they were starting to put back these pieces of equipment into production, back into circulation. So those being a black and white processing machine, a contact printer for printing 16mm film, an optical printer, a machine for duplicating film to film, several Steenbecks. What else did we have? Oh, a big giant animation stand, like a huge cast iron thing with a 3-meter column for, you know, filming cell animation. So that's where I met them. They then raised a small grant to pay for somebody to run education and to be a general administrator for the lab. And that's when I left my job working in Hackney Council, and went to work with them. And that was it then. From 2005 to 2018, that was in East London, and we finally moved the lab over to Bethnal Green, a much bigger space with a performance screening space upstairs in the classic, you know, East London loft. Sounds glamorous, but no insulation, questionable electrics, asbestos in the walls. What else was there? We had a plague of mice. It was biblical, really. What else was there? It's totally inaccessible stairs. Bethnal Green Road.
Oh, actually on Bethnal Green Road.
It was on Bethnal Green Road. 316 to 318 Bethnal Green Road, above Potty People. If anyone knows Potty People, on Bethnal Green Road. There'll be a blue plaque there one day.
Yeah.
It'll say nowhere was here. So that was called Nowhere. no.w. here. That's what that was called. So having, you know, survived that cycle from 2001 when the Lux Centre closed, and I should say the Lux still exists as a, you know, very well known and respected artist film distribution centre it's now in Highgate. I guess I would say that these two things, whereas the co-op had been production and distribution intertwined, in 2001, post that they kind of split off. So I guess Nowhere went into production photochemically, and the Lux Centre went off and continued to do distribution and screenings and publications and things like that. And so so we survived until 2018. I mean, I suppose really until 2015, and then we got into a protracted war of attrition with the landlords who, you know, classic story. Our landlord was, you know, had hitherto been a very nice, genial person who was very, very hands off. And then somebody died in the family business, and someone came in on a motorbike who was the accountant and decided that we really weren't paying enough rent for East London. And we were like, yes, but the mice, but the asbestos, but the questionable electrics, but the cold, you know. But they wanted to raise the rent to match entirely our Arts Council grant, which by then had been at a standstill since 2008, when the government were robbing the pot for the Olympics, you know, that we ultimately all ended up paying for. So in 2018, we decided that we'd had enough of fighting this protracted war, you know, with the landlords, getting lawyers involved, and we became an asset of community value, but that bought us a year or two to remain in the building. You know, the idea of being an asset of community value is you could buy the building. Well, the building was valued at X million pounds, so that wasn't an option. And as you know, we had mice and questionable electrics and asbestos, and you know, it wasn't the right building. So with the three of us who'd sort of set it up, and I think it's fair to say we had sustained a generation of photochemical film production in the UK, as well as overseas. I mean, the website has vanished. There isn't really any trace of Nowhere left online now, but we really did enable people across society to be able to engage with photochemical film, whether it's through screenings or publications or events or talks, or being able to access the lab and use the equipment. So I was teaching courses there, workshops there, doing projects there. We did summer schools. Yeah, all of this is gone. Once your website goes down, that's it. It's all, it's your classic tears in rain scenario. It's all gone.
Yeah, institutional memory or
that's right. Yeah, I just got muscle memories. That's why I'm moving my left foot around in circles. That's my muscle memory. What
is London's kind of loss has been?
Well, I should say that the best thing really could have happened, because we did a slightly cheeky thing. So we reapplied for our Arts Council funding, knowing full well that we weren't going to carry on. But it enabled us to flip the funding and the equipment to a new group. So what we didn't want to happen was the classic thing, the equipment all has to go into some lockup somewhere, and it's not seen for a decade, and by the time it emerges it's all rusty and unusable, and a new generation has to kind of entirely rediscover how it all works. So we were successful in managing to flip the grant to a new group called Not Nowhere, who are currently based in Homerton, and who are very good friends of ours, and I work with them closely, and I'm on their board, at their advisory board. So they have the resources we had, the resources that stretch all the way back to the 60s. Personally, as a family unit, we decided that London had become a very difficult place in which to try and live and work in the arts, and to have a family and to have children, and just to want to sort of not just survive, but try and maybe thrive somewhat. So we decided to do what everyone does and leave London and move to Frome. Do you want to stop it there? Should we stop it there? So we blew in. I think the collective noun is blow-ins, isn't it? For Londoners coming to Somerset. So we blew into Frome in 2018, and I set up in the converted garage at the bottom of the garden, the concrete garage with the asbestos roof, because you can never be too far from asbestos as a cultural worker. I'm glad to hear it. Yeah. I wouldn't. Yeah. So I was going to say to you, if we do a workshop, I'll have to bring a bit with me otherwise, and just leave it in the room. Yeah. We can try it. Yeah, good. Okay, good. That's great. So I can bring pictures of asbestos. That always helps as well. Yes, the garage with the leaky asbestos roof, that has become the new lab. So we moved from I can't remember how many thousands of square feet we had in London, but it's now in a 6 meter by 3 meter garage at the bottom of the garden. Is a sort of shipping container footprint sized dark room with a load of equipment crammed into it. And I did shoot a video, and then I was horrified to see it was 28 minutes long. And I don't know how I managed to warble onto myself for 28 minutes. And we don't have to necessarily bore people to tears showing that, but I can sort of paint you a mental picture if you like.
We're gonna watch it later, aren't we? Is that the plan? I think that's the plan, that we might, or
Yes.
Okay.
Or you could just never watch it, and you could just visualize a rather untidy room full of antiquated film equipment, which is all at various stages of failure, because that's how I like to keep things.
I will watch it.
Okay, good.
if no one else does, but we've got some examples of work. Would now be a good time to watch an example?
It's possible. Shall I remind myself of what I sent you? I'm trying to leave the meeting, because that's what I normally do when I try to. So the thing with Zoom is, how do you get out of? All right, there we go. View.
Yeah.
Is it me, or have they made it actually harder to? There we go. Right. They haven't. It's just me. Right. Okay. Well, it depends where you want to start, but I guess there's many more things I've made that aren't up online, of course. I'm the worst person in the world for putting my work up. Mostly because it is performance work. So we could show the Iron-Toed Lady. That might be a good place to start.
Yeah.
Because that's a dreadful pun.
Okay, hang on a sec. So share screen.
I should say as well, I feel like beholden to say that if anyone is photosensitive or epileptic, this may not be a good work to watch because it's got lots of flicker in it.
Yeah, we were
Safety first and all that. Yeah.
I did look at the first bit of it earlier and said a similar thing to my colleagues that we
Yes. There we go.
As about a bit of a. It's that one again. Let's put that up there that way. Okay.
Long live society! Wankers! Beforehand, she had a moral compass. Then she turned her back on God and Bible. And she seems to forget. She said, don't bite the hand that feeds you. Outside Parliament, you got the words, Horus Claus Reus. It's like our the Parliament is the heart of black metal. The beautifulness, the nothingness. Black, the emptiness, the nothingness. The unbaptized.
And trying to address the strength of the unions, and it's true that unions were very, very too strong maybe in this country. So it's true that maybe there need to be changes made, and they were rather paternalistic and undemocratic.
You have a pain in your leg. She says, cut it off.
Yes. She went to the extremes. She destroyed them. She went into this ideological battle and stuff. With a lot of ordinary people really, really suffered their communities, mining communities, and she offered she showed no guilt about that, no remorse whatsoever.
It's disrespect. You're rich and you're middle class, upper class, and you're not working class. Government, and how rich are you? How rich are you? How rich are you?
That's great. I mean, there's obviously a lot going on in that.
Yes. So at the heart of that, so that is a single role. Yeah. Sorry about that. It's quite flickery, isn't it? It's a single role.
Right, sorry, I must just clarify. By that I meant that, it's the snippets of sound and kind of and I'm trying to place it in time, because I know that this is, kind of actual sound that you've gone out and recorded. So,
Yes.
It's that thing of, well, I look at the title and I think, well, what's the clue in the title? And then I look at the, you do that thing of you're trying to pick up clues all the way through it. And there was So that all of those sorts of those triggers, those things that are going on inside it are making me, because my brain is trying to always, I'm afraid, make a kind of narrative link with what's going on. So
Yeah, I think we do
for
that
me,
naturally, don't we?
Yeah. So sorry, you were saying.
Well, to illuminate what that is. So it's the funeral of Margaret Thatcher.
Oh, it was
Yes. So she died. I'm one of Thatcher's children, so I thought, not literally, I thought I should. This merited being documented on film. It felt too important to kind of miss. So it was a single roll of black and white film. It was shot on a Bolex with a time-lapse unit, taking long exposures of the entire day. So we got there very early in the morning, found a space by St. Paul's, ironically amongst a group of Falklands War veterans who were all very done up with jackets and ceremonial blazers and ties and things. And yeah, just documented the day. It felt important to document the day. And then the idea came to me, and it's a dreadful pun, because I'm into bad puns, but the Iron Lady became the Iron Toned Lady. So in early film processes before color, was invented, color motion picture film was invented, color would be achieved on black and white by immersing a black and white silver-based film into the salts of another metal. In this case, it's iron. So from black and white, silver, the iron molecule would attach to the black and white and become blue. And so that's how color was achieved in the early days of cinema. So what I did was I left the film, I processed it, and then I left it in the iron toning solution for 11 hours to sort of symbolically mark a year of Thatcher's premiership with one hour of toning. Knowing full well that the iron toning has generally should be no more than about half an hour. Then you get a really deep blue, and that's sufficient. Leave it for longer than that, and the emulsion actually starts to crack under the sheer weight of the chemical reaction of the iron toning. So, I'm a very literal person, actually. It's a very literal work, but it was to just sort of mark the passing of someone who I guess has cast a shadow, whatever your views of that shadow might be, and whether it's benign or perhaps not so benign, malign indeed. To mark that and to sort of make a work that referenced it in some way, acknowledged it in some way. And the sound was all sound recorded in the crowd, and I don't know how well you could hear it, but you could kind of hear the ebbing and the flowing of public opinion, those who were very much for her, those who were very much against her. When the coffin arrived at the steps of St. Paul's, this was, I don't know if people still do it now, but the iPads had just come out, I think, maybe a few years before. So everyone raised the iPads and immediately blocked the view of the Falklands veterans at the back, who immediately went into kind of, shut down operational mode and went in and sort of forced them to put the iPads down. But I had the Bolex on a long pole, like a monopole pointing down like this. And weirdly, they had a lot of respect for this. They sort of saw it as, they sort of were familiar with it somehow. And yeah, it was, we had some odd conversations, none of which were recorded, but it was an interesting day for all sorts of reasons. Can I tell you a little anecdote about that day as well?
Yeah,
it's a funny anecdote. So I was with a Canadian artist who was in residency at Nowhere, and Thatcher died. And I said, you should come to this. It's a moment in history. You should come to the funeral. And I'd previously tried to explain to him about the Tory party, and particularly how Michael Heseltine got the name Tarzan. And at the end of the funeral, it was very strange because those attendees at the funeral who aren't wanted for war crimes got to leave by one exit, and at the back of the exit left all of everybody else, basically, of whom one of them was Michael Heseltine. So I said, Danny, Michael Heseltine. It went, oh my God. He goes, Tarzan, where? So Michael Heseltine's like this. Great days. Again, it wasn't recorded. Yeah.
No, well, I don't know what anybody else, like, for me, it completely lends itself, and because, you know, Thatcher's time was that kind of, you know, I kind of remember it as being the sort of, she came in at the, you know, around the punk time as well, so very, you know, that edginess, and that's for me what it kind of conjured up, all kinds of memories of that time, really.
So somewhere that roll of film is still slowly destroying itself. So I had to digitize it. Here's another humorous, mildly amusing anecdote. So that was the very last roll of what Kodak Film Lab considered to be a troublesome roll that they ever allowed to go through their scanners, because the next week the guy phoned me up and he said, "Yeah, James," he goes, "you can't send me stuff like that again." He goes, "We got James Bond going through there next week." He said, "And that's left blue shit all over the rollers." So that was it. That weekend, I dropped that film in, and my friend Rosalind Fowler, she dropped in a roll of film that had been soaking in the mud of the Thames, and she hadn't washed it. So this poor guy, I can't remember his name now. He's a lovely guy. Yeah, he had to deal with both these rolls of film over one weekend, and then had to clean the scanner. And actually, you know, all joking aside, like, you know, these things are like £250,000, these machines. But the idea that James Bond or Star Wars, it was something that just shouldn't have anything rubbing off onto it. Was going through it.
That's hilarious.
Yeah,
that is a great anecdote.
Yeah, you can tell I got a lot of anecdotes. Hey, well, sorry, say again.
Was the scanner, was it all right afterwards?
Well, it was fine, because these people, they've seen it all, you know. They work sort of 24-hour shifts in shorts and t-shirts all times of the year, you know. It's just an all year all year round all weather outfit. They breathe in heady cocktails of chemical vapor. They've seen it all, nothing phases them. But yeah, it was just a sort of gentle sort of word in my shell to say, yeah, I can't do that again. Yeah. And that was it. Like, yeah, there hasn't really been that there are, you know, I suppose I decided to buy a telecine machine myself to be able to scan the kinds of films that I knew they wouldn't, off of the back of that. Machines that could be cleaned much easier with an old toothbrush and some isopropyl alcohol and a bit of Brasso, you know, whereas I'm talking about machines that take up sort of half the room, you know, half the wall behind you, that you know, most people never really get to see or interact with. So yeah, joking aside, I guess one could think it was a bit cheeky to sort of expect them to be able to do it. And it all credit to him for doing it, but yeah, that was it. No more after that. Last roll.
I'm trying to think who it was. There was an article the other week where I forget which director it was. He was slightly being a bit pedantic about the fact that you shouldn't call films because they're not.
Oh, I saw that. Yes, it was it was in The Guardian, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That's right. Yes, I can't remember who it was either.
What director? It'll come back to me. But
yeah.
What, a film on the television?
No. He was saying if it's not shot on film, you shouldn't call it film. You shouldn't call it film. I think he suggested one might call it a movie. But then I read all the comments underneath with interest, where people were really going into kind of the history of film and actually what it really ought to be called, and you know, that side of things. But it is interesting, isn't it? Having been that sort of dominant image gathering medium for over a century, it does take a while for our sort of collective conscious to be able to find new terminologies for things. You know, and the fact that it still relies on a familiar shape and form, which is a lens-based system, you know, encoding something onto something, you know, until we have true sort of psychic projection, where you know, the sort of existence type viewing experience. I think where there is still tangible, hard things that you hold in your hand to generate an image, we will still be saddled with terms like film and movie and the pictures, you know, or the flicks. You know, even going back to the idea of a flip book, you know, I mean, I think the flicks is a term that's sort of dying out, really, but my parents might still use that term. But Yeah, you know, and we were talking to some students the other day, and we were just, you know, talking about, I don't know how we got onto the subject, but persistence of vision and that idea. Oh yeah, because they were French students. And I kind of talked about, because obviously Bridgewater's twinned with La Ciotat, and talked about the Lumiere brothers and, you know, those first films, and then showed them Chris Milk's, I can never remember the name of it, something Versa, no, his VR piece anyway, which again references Lumiere, you know, and kind of culminates with Kubrick imagery, you know. So, you know, it's that thing of how films, movies, whatever you want to call them, continue to reference, you know, the whole history of film, that we, you know, we look back and we do all that kind of visual referencing, whether it's the pram going down the stairs in Battleship Potemkin or whatever it is. It kind of filmmakers like to always sort of make those references back, don't they? You know, I mean, The Shining now is constantly being referenced in new films. You know,
yes,
we do that homage back, don't we? In a way. And even if you look at Final Cut Pro, you know, the icon is still a pair of scissors. You know?
That's right. Yes, it's still the razor blade, isn't it? Even with Da Vinci, it's still a razor blade. And you sort of think, well, that's really, you know, it's a strange. There used to be an icon, one of those programs about 20 years ago. If you wanted to do a single frame, it used to flash up as a Nitso Super 8 camera, which I always thought was really, I can't remember which program it was, but it's almost like, you know, you can't quite let go, you know, you can't quite stand independently, which is fine, you know. I mean, it's all circles and rectangles still, isn't it? You know, when you boil down the essence of what film actually is, it's either circular things or it's rectangular things.
Well, and there's been a conversation for quite a long time, as you know, just even in terms of digitizing. So, you know, when you digitize it, what format do you digitize it to, and what's you know, what's the format of the future? Kind of thinking about archives, you know, what is still going to stand up in 100 years' time as a format. And actually, film as a format is, unless you've got nitrate that explode, you know, spontaneously combusts, actually some of it is holding up pretty well.
Well, the nitrate will hold up well as long as it, you know, as you said, as long as it's kept away from sources of ignition or heat. It's still, you know, and it's stored correctly and doesn't shrink. It will still be viewable. I mean, what's that now? Like 130 years or so, and count. I mean, 16 millimeter is 100 years old this year. 9.5 was 100 years old last year. So 16 millimeter was safety film. 16 millimeter, 1923. So yeah, that was safety film alongside the nitrate. And I think the nitrate, the flammable stuff, was phased out in the 1956 or 1958. But you know, the BFI I think still does nitrate seasons, doesn't it? You know, I mean, there are very strict protocols about how it's projected and handled, and you know, the projector can kind of snuff itself out if it catches fire, and the booth can be shut down and deprived of oxygen if it catches fire. I know all this because a friend of mine was working there and said that if there was a fire, it would be like Indiana Jones and the hat scene, to reference another film, that the shutters would come down. And if he left anything behind, he would just be sealed in this burning inferno of nitrate. But just it makes me think also, in terms of that sort of, I'm going to call it an anxiety around how, you know, binary 1s and 0 based digital images are sort of transmutated or migrated. I found it very interesting when Fuji stopped production of motion picture film, I think in 2011. I might be wrong, 2010 or 2011. Fuji left the business completely. Theretofore, they've been making black and white film, color film, and 35mm film. They left it completely. The one stock they still make, I believe, is called a Turner 500. It's guaranteed to last for 500 years. And it's an archival stock for backing up digitally generated images back onto film. So I think you'd have yellow, magenta, cyan separation color negatives of things like Pixar films, which could then be, you know, 1, 2,
Right.
3, remarried again in the future, should anything happen to the storage of the digital.
That's mad.
Yeah, I may be wrong. Fact check everything I say, because I'm lazy and I hear these things and I just accept them as gospel truth. So please do
Yeah,
fact
it
check
could
me.
just be-
Yeah,
could
but
just be
I think I
random.
did look that one up and I saw that, it existed. It was out there. I think the storage facility is the same place that, the Mormons are building the Ark, which is going to save us all. Whenever you do a DNA test, you're entered into the book of life, and you will be saved on Judgment Day. I think those cans of film are going the same way. So come the judgment, come the rapture, you'll all be able to watch Toy Story.
Possibly one of the best films.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, I could go with that. It's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's your aspiration now, James, in terms of what you want to do with kind of what you're setting up in your asbestos filled garage?
Well, the asbestos is gone. Actually, that was a bit of hyperbole on my part. Yeah, it's that's all gone. It's been replaced with a proper corrugated tin roof, and it's insulated as well. Well, I would like to continue to hold a space where people can work with these resources. I think one always has to keep an eye on the future and who is going to inherit these resources, because the biggest problem we have right now is the inevitable skills gap that comes from a generation of technicians, scientists, production staff, dying off or retiring in a happier way. So there's that. It's about knowledge transfer and ensuring that things like the Bolexes can still be fixed. So there isn't just one person in the UK who can repair them or service them. So knowledge transfer. Continuing to make my own stuff and screen my own stuff. And when one has a big kind of life changing event like leaving a city and changing jobs and starting up as a new entity as a freelancer, that takes a bit of time. So I'm slowly starting to re-pivot myself or relocate myself here in Somerset. Obviously the 2 years of pandemic haven't necessarily made it that easy, but this summer, well, obviously we're hoping to do some work together, aren't we? Some workshops this summer, cameraless film and maybe a Bolex workshop. I'm doing a performance with a group that I work with called Secluded Bronte at the ESP projects in Yeovil, the project space there, if anyone knows it.
Zoe Lee and
Zoe and Stephen. Farmer Glitch. So I'll be doing something with them. I'm making a series of short 100-foot films at the moment that celebrate and embrace the failure of the various bits of equipment around me, with a semi-humorous narrative recorded on optical sound alongside them. So I have a camera that I can record film and sound simultaneously onto the film strip, which broke last year as I was using it, so I had to get it fixed. It came back, and now it's ready to use again. So
fab. Well, you must let us know the date for that, because
I will. I think it's the 27th of April, so I've got
it's quite soon.
It's fairly soon. I haven't really left myself much time to actually finish these works. So but I will be doing my live hair cutting and burning performance, which you have a little excerpt of actually, if you wanted to segue into that. And then there's a much longer film about failure that I haven't finished yet, which has been about 10 years in the making. So it takes me a long time to make a film. I find it much easier to help other people make films than I do to actually finish off my own stuff. But that's the nature of it, isn't it?
Okay, so we've got that one, have we?
It's very short. It's only about 40 seconds long.
Just find it.
Is that a new cup of tea or coffee you're drinking there, or is that the same one?
It's the same one.
Is it still going?
It's still going, It's not particularly warm anymore. But
well, because I disappointingly realised that I thought I'd finished mine, and then I looked down and I realised I had about a quarter of it left, but I can't bring myself to drink it now.
So which one is it called?
It's called Hair in the Gate. Hair in the Gate excerpt.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
Okay, great. No, did I press, were the things ticked for the sound? I didn't notice. We'll soon find out. Show this.
Yeah. Short and not terribly sweet. So yeah, that's a performance. That's some slightly haphazard documentation of a performance piece called Hair in the Gate. So again, this comes from a throwaway comment a projectionist made at the BFI to me when discussing a newly struck and you know they paid a lot of money for it, a newly struck print of a classic film, and a hair appeared in the projection as it was being projected. So I had a word with them afterwards and said, because the hair disappeared. So I was like, what do? You know, how do you get rid of the hair? Thinking, well, you can't squirt something into the gate, can you? How do you get rid of it? So he said, oh, you lick your finger, just put a little bit of saliva on the edge of the film strip, and the saliva carries away the hair with it. So I just thought that was one of the sort of most incredible revelations I'd ever heard from an insider in the film industry. That I then, you know, the way one's mind goes, you imagine cumulatively how much saliva and hair gets added to a film print over the duration of its lifespan of projection. But the idea was to make a work that accelerated that to its kind of absurd conclusion. So it's a clear loop of film running through a projector, 60mm film, with the optical sound head turned on. And the first 5 minutes of the performance, I'm cutting my hair and deliberately inserting the wedges of hair into the gate of the projector. And of course, the heat of the bulb causes the hair to keratinize and melt and smoke. So the whole room is filled. I'm really doing a good job at selling you the idea of coming along to this event. The whole room fills with the smell of burning hair, keratinized hair. And that's kind of what you see. That sort of demonic clump in the middle of the white rectangle is burnt hair. And then the second half of the performance, equally sort of disgusting, is that I use great quantities of saliva and clamp it to the film. And of course, in performance, you know, you get nervous and your mouth gets dry. So you see, again, this kind of goes back to the sort of three-dimensional nature of film and projection, but you see, you know, huge bubbles of saliva, and the soundtrack is picking all of this up. So any hairs that pass under the sound head become crackles or pops. Getting close to breakfast cereal. The clogs of saliva become snaps. There you go. Done it.
Wow.
Done it. Should get sponsorship for that, shouldn't I?
Yeah.
Sponsored by Kellogg's.
Yeah.
So that's it. It's a very strict 10-minute performance piece. 5 minutes of burning hair, 5 minutes of saliva. You feel your mouth is full of hair and disgusting burnt hair at the end of it. But it's a price I'm willing to pay for ultimately a joke that I myself am laughing at. Yeah.
Like you say, the absurdity of film.
Yeah, as long as I'm smiling at the end of it, I don't really care about anyone else. If it makes me laugh, it's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good approach to life, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Okay, so do we want to watch something else briefly, or do we want to move on to the activity?
Yeah, I've got 20.
Well,
Activity.
we got until 8 p.m. have we still? Is that our kind of cutoff point? Yeah. So I mean, time has flown by, hasn't it? It's just you know.
I mean, not that we're going to kick anybody out at 8 o'clock.
No.
Yeah.
It's not like I've got anywhere to be either, to be honest, you know. So the activity, such as it was, I just thought it might be of interest to, you know, I wasn't sure who was going to be in the room and if anyone had ever physically handled a strip of film before, but kind of feeding into what we've just been talking about, I thought maybe the easiest way of understanding how tactile film is as a medium would just be to take that piece of clear leader that I sent you, which hopefully you have got, and which I had pre-looped, pre-spliced into a loop. And I thought if people wanted to run it through their hands and just touch it as much as possible.
Okay, don't touch it then.
Yeah, you can touch it. I'd like you to touch it. I'd like you to commune with it. I'd like you to be at one with it. So yeah, you know, perhaps if everyone felt that they would be willing to sort of get their hands all over it. And what I'm hoping happens is that you transfer fingerprints or some indexical trace of your being into the film strip. So this is a one-time only, site-specific, like yeah.
I was just thinking when you were talking about saliva, all that DNA, the DNA of every projectionist is kind of is
well, I remember reading, you know, because one shouldn't also understate the amount of geekiness involved in my role here. You know, I read a lot of I do a lot of reading of projection manuals, you know, from the 1940s. But I remember reading in a film restoration book that they had removed, I think, almost a third of the weight of the reel had been dust and dirt and kind of cumulative. Maybe it was a bit less than that, but a huge quantity of the reel that had been conserved was basically just filth. And so you do have to wonder how much of that was saliva, you know, and just detritus from every projection, you know.
I suppose if I have a hesitancy, you know, when I listen to you talk, and you know, there is so much knowledge in it, and so the hesitancy to even, you know, kind of get going with it is that journey, you know, that I suppose it's like anything else really, but do you think you need a huge amount of knowledge to get started with it?
No, you don't. And I think that's why something like what you're doing, you know, one could consider to be the first rung of the ladder. And it depends on how high you want to go up that ladder. But that's why, you know, cameraless film is such a great way into this for people, because you have an instant understanding of how simple it is to create the illusion of time passing by hand just with a strip of film. And that strip of film doesn't have to be anything fancy you've bought from an online store, you know, 100 foot of clear film. You could just buy, you know, ideally it would be a Disney film from eBay, dunk it in a bucket of bleach, that strips away all of the images, and it leaves you with a clear strip onto which you can project your innermost, you know, abstract thoughts and designs. Yeah, that's all that's needed. And a projector, you know, which are fairly easy to come by.
Oh wow!
So, you know, it's the simplest way of understanding how this medium works. The fact that it's 24 frames makes 1 second of time, and if you draw a circle 24 times in between those rectangles, the circle will appear, albeit wobbling around a bit, but it will appear on screen for 1 second. Yeah. And then you think, well, if you can do that, you can make a circle get big, or you can make it go small just by increasing the size of the dots, you know.
So you could draw on it, couldn't you, as well?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And the workshop that, you know, I'm hoping we will be able to do, I think in April, the cameraless film workshop will, you know, show you how that's possible with some very early historical examples of how artists in the, you know, the 1920s and 30s were thinking about how else one could work with this medium without having to have an expensive camera or having to have specialist knowledge or even really having to have a projector, you know, that you could work with it almost psychically and intuitively. And as long as you understood that being the canvas and that the projector enforces a kind of pattern by the nature of the fact it's a rectangle, you know, doing that, then once you understand that, then it all sort of falls into place after it.
I'm slightly blown away by that idea that I can just take an old film, you know, like you're saying, and just dunk it in bleach, and then I've got film. No wonder you are the king of the cartoon.
Yeah, except you can't get them at car boots anymore. They're all on eBay now. You know, people have wised up to what they've got. You know, which I suppose is fair enough. And you know, obviously, if an old print is scratched, the scratch will survive over to the bleaching process. So if you want something more pristine, you know, you would have to acquire 100 foot of manufactured machine clear leader to work with that is kind of pristine. But
is that what this is?
Well, that's stuff that I import actually from America. So it's stuff that I do actually sell to people who want to do this, you know, and have ideally a sort of pristine surface to work with, one that isn't pre-damaged by dint of it having been projected many, many times. But for most people, because they're going to be painting onto it, it doesn't matter if it's a bit damaged or a bit shonky. You know, you can draw on it and paint on it and collage onto it, and you know, it's fine. So yeah, I'm a big advocate for people being able to work with this stuff intuitively without having to have fancy specialist knowledge. And that cameraless film workshop, I mean, literally, I taught it at my wife's school about 10 years ago. Every child in the school did it. There was, you know, 400 children from the age of 5 to 11 made films without a camera and, you know, projected it in the school hall, and everyone understood. Everyone got it, you know.
Yeah. Lovely.
Yeah. So is everyone sufficiently sort of laid on the hands?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So what I'm hoping is that Deb, if you could put it on the Steamback, that once it's looping through the Steamback, you might see some trace of yourself left behind as a you know, some kind of indexical memory.
You're going to use it to hack our phones.
That's it, exactly. I'm going to get into your phones, your tablets, your iPads, your laptops. Yeah, exactly.
Are they making?
I never thought of that, actually. It's a good idea. It's a very good idea. Yeah.
Are they making Super 8 film these days? I've got a camera at home.
Yes, Kodak they make a variety of color negative films. They make one black and white reversal film, which is that one I was holding up. That's black and white positive film, Tri-X. And then they make a color positive film. So they're called reversal films. Those are the ones that are designed to be run through a projector once you've shot on them. You know, what you shot in the camera becomes what you run through the projector.
Right.
But as I said at the beginning of all of this, that the workflows people are now really used to is they shoot photochemically. That's I call it photochemical film, not analog, because I think that's a bit of a misnomer. Shoot photochemically, process, and then project or work digitally. That seems to be the workflow.
Right.
So by all means, you can use your Super 8 camera and film with it, but the expectation is that you would then be editing or cutting the film digitally. You wouldn't be, you know, actually physically editing the camera original.
It has to be sent off and then come back to you.
It either has to be sent off, or if you wanted to acquire, as again I said, one of those, you could do it yourself. You know, the chemicals are readily available. All you need is some sort of dark space or a large change bag, and the desire to you know, it's not for everybody, but yeah, cracking that open in the dark and then taking out 50 feet of film and winding it in.
Where are they sent off these days in Europe?
So it always used to go to Berlin, to a laboratory called Andec, but actually post Brexit, that's become a disaster zone in this country. So my friend Edmund on 8mm, he has taken it upon himself the incredible challenge of putting back into production a color negative processing machine and a black and white processing machine for 8 and 16. So now it's being done, on a smaller scale here in the UK in London, which is great. And I think he's hoping to be able to do color reversal as well. Is there anything there?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah.
I've done this in a very rudimentary way. I haven't really,
That's okay. That's you know, after my own heart.
It's going through the days, as it were.
Yeah.
It's very
It's interesting. Once the digital camera fails to see a human being in the shot, it desperately pans out searching for one, doesn't it?
Got some hair there.
Is that what it's doing? Is it?
That's
Yeah,
what it's doing. There it is. Yeah, it's found you now.
Yeah, and I think also because I've slightly got it dragging on the floor as well, it's picking up more and more.
Well, there we go. It's yeah. So it's a site-specific work.
It goes through as well.
Yeah.
So it's kind of changing every time it's going through.
Yeah.
It's changing. It's not staying the same.
I think when I came there, I think we
Oh,
ascertained that
cool.
the sound head doesn't pick up sound, does it, on that?
No, it doesn't.
No. So if you were to lace it through the sound head, you would also be hearing the sound that those traces of the room and your fingerprints leave on the film. So can you see fingerprints? I can't quite see from here.
You can, but just
Yeah.
only every now and then you can.
Yeah. Yeah. So even as it runs through, if you continue to handle it,
Yeah.
you will start to see it changing.
Maybe we probably need slightly greasier fingers, maybe. Or maybe even a little bit of ink on our fingers.
So now we're getting an idea that you can make a loop long enough to go around the whole of Bridgewater, all running through the Steenbeck. That would be that's an Arts Council proposal right there, isn't it?
Yeah. It is mesmerising though. I do find it mesmerising.
Yeah, it's hypnotic, it's mesmerizing, it's it's in tune with our alpha rhythms, is how I think of it.
Definitely getting some stuff on the
Yeah.
line. There was definitely big fingerprints there. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I suppose it, like you say, that thing of putting it on 24 frames so that.
Well, if you
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. There you go. You can see it there. There's definitely a point where there's a lot of fingerprints on it. It's mostly carpet. Think of that. And that's where it's joined, that's the joint. Hiya. Oh.
I was
going to say, because you're digital, aren't you? It is no big stuff.
Well, now I've got 2 or 3 projectors at home, and I've got my grandparents' Super 8 film, and I went to Holcombe in '96 and did a 23-minute film on Hong Kong on Super 8.
On Super 8?
Yeah.
Yeah.
hello.
We'll come back to you.
Did you see I disappeared there?
So, James, you know Lisa and Paolo, don't you, of Echo Park?
I know Lisa and Paolo, and I know they're going to be here in April, aren't they? Very soon.
That's right, yeah.
Are they coming to see you?
Well, we don't know if it's confirmed yet, but
Nice.
they have said they're going to try and pop into the engine.
Oh, right, nice. Yeah, great.
Yeah, so there's a couple of possible dates. So I was feeding back by Yolanda, who was one of the Somerset Symphony participants, who's in touch with Lisa and Paolo regularly, and so we were just looking at diaries and that kind of thing to see
Nice.
What's the best time, or how it might work out. It'd be great to see them again. So.
Yeah, that'd be good. That's great. I'm looking forward to seeing them. It's been it must be about 10 years since I saw them actually in the flesh. So yeah, it'd be nice to see them. But I think they're staying here in Frome for a bit.
I think it's more than 10 years for us actually, because during COVID I think it was 10 years since we've done the project. So
yes,
it must be 11 or 12, definitely.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
So everyone, because I disappeared then because some particularly heavy rain landed on the internet here in Frome and knocked it out. But did everyone see, did everyone recognize their fingerprints basically? Yeah, you all saw something basically. Yeah,
we definitely face or,
Yeah.
or something, yeah,
Yeah.
Not necessarily my fingerprint, but
Yeah.
who knows?
Yeah.
I'll go and test it now on a biometric device and just see if I can.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Just see if the iPhone opens.
I wondered whether we wanted to kind of, because we're finishing at 8, aren't we, or thereabouts?
Yeah.
Do you have any more questions, or did you? I feel like I've talked an awful lot, and do people have questions for me? Anyone like?
Just wondering when they digitize a film, does it per frame does it take longer than a 24th of a second? Does it go in real time, or does it take longer?
It depends on the machine, really. My one captures at 10 frames a second, so it takes about, I'd say, maybe 8 minutes for a 100-foot roll to go through the machine in total. Other machines I've seen, like the higher end ones, like the one that I was banned from putting sloppy film through. I guess those would be a little bit faster. The one that people seem to really, the system people really seem to want to be able to use themselves are the ones that use a digital camera, that one frame of the film is one digital frame on the camera, so it's like frame click frame click frame click, but that's quite time consuming. You can imagine over time how long that would take to capture a film, but I suppose you would get the very highest quality. I know my scanner is HD, obviously there's 2K, 4K. I know people are now talking about 8K and 6K and 12K systems of capture, and I think 16mm Super 16 film, again, anybody watching this may vehemently disagree, but I think it can only go up to 6K. I think 6K is the ultimate resolution for a frame of 16mm film. So I don't quite know. I would question whether the higher resolutions you're actually maybe starting to get things that aren't really there, or that you wouldn't perhaps want to see, when the resolution is so high. But like, I think, when you're talking about standard 8, which is like the width of half a fingernail, the idea of that being at 8K, I think is a bit ridiculous, really. It's a higher resolution than the actual frame itself is capable of holding, I think. But
yeah. So James, so aside from this, which I'm now definitely going to go and stock up on bleach for and get some secondhand films, what else would you recommend starting with?
I think it depends on the kind of what people want to make, doesn't it? I mean, most people can access a Super 8 camera fairly easily, or a standard 8 camera fairly easily, and the film for both is readily available. I would say that it's clearly a lot more expensive now to start shooting with film than it was when I started using it all those years ago and was picking things up at car boot fairs. And I'd say probably that Super 8 film is as expensive, if not more expensive, than 16mm. But if you want to shoot sorry, the door is creaking open here next to me. If you want to shoot with film in a sort of affordable way, you can shoot onto print stock. It doesn't have to be nice camera stock. You could use print stock, which is quite easily available, very, very high contrast and very low ASA. So you can only use it in bright sunlight. But for people wanting to shoot without feeling like they're losing a lot of money in doing so, and sort of learn, that could be one way around. The other way of making images without having to have a load of fancy equipment is to do photograms. So you would have a roll of film in a dark room and a red light, and you just place objects on the film strip, shine a torch along it, process it, and there you have the image of the objects left behind on the film strip, which, if you put a chain on a film strip and it goes over 24 frames, it's 1 second of chain in time. So that's another way of working with it without having to have a Bolex, because these are becoming harder and harder to get working. And I buy and sell these with a friend of mine. Actually, we buy these and we occasionally get them serviced or fixed up if they're not working. But even one like that with a simple lens, you'd be looking at maybe £1,000 plus.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they have they have a value, they have a worth, because everybody wants to work with film.
Yeah. Any other questions for Jane?
No, I was thinking that if Super 8 is as expensive as 16, it might be nice to work with 16, but.
Well, I think so. I think so, because
£1,000.
yeah, exactly. Well, that's it. It's like, do you buy or you said you have a Super 8 camera, you could save the money and spend it on Super 8 film stock, or you could invest in a 60mm camera and then maybe shoot a roll every couple of months or something like that. There are always ways of getting, as I said, you can shoot on print stock. You could buy 400-foot rolls of film and break those down onto 100-foot spools for shooting, but you'd have to have a darkroom and some way of rewinding it. But what, artists are incredible at finding frugal ways of doing things, and shortcutting and short-circuiting things, that bypassing things that cost a lot of money and finding more direct routes. So why bother with a telecine when you can film it from the Steenbeck screen or from a projector off the wall?
Yeah.
That adds another layer to it. That there are many ways to achieve a photochemical image that don't necessarily have to involve a huge amount of money. You can buy expired film, out of date film on eBay and shoot with that, and that will give you, if it's color, it will give you very strange color shifts, and there may be cosmic rays have bombarded it and it may be fogged, but you'll still get something from it. If that's not for you, then you pay your money, you get what you pay for, don't you? But that's why I hand process everything, because the idea of spending the roll of film itself, being what, £40-50, and then another 100 for processing and scanning. It's like, well, you might spend £200 on a developing tank plus, but actually after 2 rolls, it's kind of paid itself back.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, the next question is, when can I move in?
Well, I know Bridgewater is about an hour or so away, isn't it? But if anyone would like to come and see the lab, if anyone's heading to Frome at any point and would like to come around for a cup of tea or herbal tea and see the space and chat, IRL, then happy to do that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
my life is now here in the Southwest, so I would like to work with artists based in the Southwest. I would like to for want of a better term, embed myself more into the community here, so yeah.
I think we should ask our friends at Somerset Artworks if they would reshare this talk, so that the artists that are part of that network, that membership, also know about James too. I mean, obviously Zoe does, so
and I did a workshop with them at the project space, not last year, the January before. We did a cameraless film workshop there that went down quite well. So yeah, I know a few people, but that's a big group, isn't it? The Somerset Artworks. So
yeah, definitely, yeah. And and obviously you're going to come over here, and that's great. But if people wanted to find out directly about you, James, have you got a website at the moment?
It's sort of disappeared, and I don't quite know what happened to it. But I'm working on another one. So my I'm so terrible. I didn't even give the name of my project in Somerset is Error1, so it's nowhere backwards. So Error1_film is me on Instagram. But I am going to build a website because I think I need to have a little bit more visibility for what I do and how I do it. So that's going to be forthcoming. I just have to get my head around Squarespace. I have to engage with the fetid pool of digital.
Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this. But if you can just stay there for I'm going to end the broadcast. But if you can just stay there, James, because I'm going to ask you a couple of things.
Okay, go for it. Yeah.
Great. But thank you so much.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for hours. So do you want to do end? No, that's the end of the meeting.